All right, hello everyone. Welcome to today's stream. I think it's going to be a really interesting stream that we've got here today for you folks. So I have got Kristin here today, who's joining me. The reason that I've chosen to have a live discussion here with Kristin today and ask her some questions and let her answer your questions is because I think Kristin represents something quite unique in the animal rights movement and also in the general political spectrum. So if you've seen the thumbnail and the title for this video, right? So it's leftist, feminist, pro-life, vegan. So it's obviously a very unique set of beliefs that she has there. And I guess we're going to explore stuff from the pro-life side of stuff and talk about how that kind of stuff relates to veganism, to feminism and leftism, that kind of stuff, because I guess many people are looking at that title, looking at this thumbnail and thinking, wait, what the hell? So, Kristin, did you want to just introduce yourself and tell me about the stuff you do, the activism you do, whether that be the vegan stuff and the pro-life stuff as well?
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Kristin. So I'm currently in Seattle, Washington, and here I found a really good scene for animal rights activism. So I've gotten a lot more into animal rights activism lately, joining with different local groups that have been here, such as Animal Rights Initiative. We've done some anti-fur demonstrations. I've done some chalking vegan messages at parks and stuff like that. Years ago, I did an Anonymous for the Voiceless Cube of Truth, different things like that. And then on the pro-life side, I have my own little organization. Well, it's also pro-life and vegan, called Vegans for Preborn Rights. So I want to get both of those, get activism going for both of those issues, as well as any sort of intersectional issue. But I've also done my local March for Life. I used to work with an organization called Progressive Anti-Abortion Uprising, which is very activisty. So we've done lots of activism for that. We've done, sidewalk counseling where you hand people pamphlets saying, here are your other options so that you don't feel like you have no other choice but to abort. I've done chalking. I've done different things, different marches. And also I'm just kind of, typical lefty feminist. So I've done Black Lives Matter marches and the women's marches and different things like that too.
So what are like some of the sort of things that people would, I mean, I guess you briefly just talked about it now, but what are some of the views that you might hold that the average, right-wing pro-lifer or whoever might come across your profile and think, who is this, woke so-and-so who is obviously pro-choice and stuff? Like, what are some of those sort of views that you have that would make them, understandably think that about you, given that most people who do have such views tend to be pro-choice?
Pretty much all of them. I'm very anti-war. I'm anti-death penalty. I'm anti-gun. I am against all forms of violence and oppression. I support LGBTQIA+ rights. I support anti-racism. I support anti-capitalism and anti-classism. I kind of want to see a moneyless, governmentless, classless society. So I'm an anarcho-communist. I think we should all live together in peace and harmony, taking care of each other as we need, and everyone contributing to the community as they can, and everyone getting what they need so that we can all survive and thrive. I also normally have bright purple hair, but it's super faded. People always stereotype me as pro-choice because of that and because of my piercings. I've got like a Nirvana tattoo, and I'm very into grunge. So all of the alternative, aspects of me get pinpointed as pro-choice too. Also very feminist, intersectional, anti-patriarchy feminist. I'm very sex positive, very into just like typical average lefty things, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, and that just fascinates me because when I came across your profile on Twitter, I was like, damn, wait a minute. This is why I call a lot of, leftists within the movement, I call them box tickers, right? Because they tend to have the exact same uniform view on every little thing. And so in the thumbnail, I did the thing where it ticks the boxes, but then it's not the pro-choice, right? Because you are an anomaly in that regard. It's like you have, and that's a credit to you because it means you're thinking independently and you see nuance in every political position there is. So I guess I'm just wondering, what was it that you tell me about your like pro-life journey, as it were. How did it start? What made you become pro-life?
So when I was 14, I found out what abortion was. And because I had just taken middle school biology class where we learn all about DNA and RNA and mitochondria and how the cells are the basic functioning unit of life because they check the boxes of the 7 signs of life, and how the sperm has the male's DNA and the egg has the female's DNA, and when they combine, another human being is there, and so on and so forth. And so when I heard that abortion was terminating a pregnancy, I knew that that would mean killing a child. And it's specifically because I'm a left-wing feminist that I knew that was wrong immediately. Because how can you be against war and against, slaughtering animals and against slaughtering this group and that group and the other, but be okay slaughtering children? That makes 0 sense. So naturally, and then also I knew it was like exploiting women, because it's like, how can you, now I've learned a lot more about why people who are pregnant might be pro-choice. But in my mind at the time, I was like, how can you feel someone moving around inside of you, kicking you, and then want an abortion? That's got to be something that men push on us. It's specifically a male-led thing. Men are exploiting women. And that was what I thought when I was 14, 15. And I still have realized a lot more about that, but there's a lot more that goes into it. So I had all of these left-wing and feminist reasons to be against abortion immediately, to the point where I assumed that people like me automatically would be pro-life. I assumed that that was the norm for people like me to be pro-lifers, and that if anyone was going to be an activist, it was going to be a full-on left-winger feminist who's taken down the patriarchy by taking down abortion. And then after a while, I started hearing the stereotypes of how people like me were supposed to be pro-choice. I was like, that doesn't make any sense at all. You can't be against oppression and violence toward all, but then support oppression and violence toward the most vulnerable and defenseless human beings. Because these, they're really just babies. They're younger babies than the average born baby. So that makes them even more vulnerable, even more defenseless, even more innocent, and even more worthy of like making sure we're not oppressing them and slaughtering them and giving them full support. And then on top of that, it's like, there's a lot that goes into like feminist reasons to be pro-life. It's like a huge, expansive world, which I'm sure we'll get into. But just like as somebody who has a uterus and has eggs, I just kind of saw it as exploitative to me as well. So that was what kickstarted my journey. And once I heard the stereotypes and heard that people like me were supposed to be pro-choice, I was like, that can't be right. I've got to start looking it up and find out if there are people out there like me. And that's how I came across organizations like Democrats for Life of America, Feminists for Life, Secular Pro-Life. And so I started getting myself involved in the online community, making friends with all sorts of pro-lifers who were like me, and joining all sorts of organizations for people like me. And that just grew and grew and grew from there.
Right. And then now, obviously that must have been a big culture shock for you then, sort of when you were younger, and you said you just assumed that everyone who shared your views would be pro-life, because that should just be the thing that's compatible with leftist and feminist and so on beliefs. Talk to us about some of like the hostility and stuff you faced from other leftists about being pro-life.
Yeah, there's a lot of hostility from pro-choice leftists. Basically, I fit like various different minority groups. I've got unique disabilities such as Tourette's syndrome that get made fun of a lot. I've always had, some sort of level of poverty, both living with my parents and living on my own, working in the restaurant industry where we don't get paid much, and so on and so forth. So I've dealt with lots of classism, lots of ableism. I'm female, so I've dealt with misogyny. I'm on the obscure parts of the LGBTQIA plus spectrum, so I've dealt with hatred for that. But of all of the things that make me unique, and including like anarcho-communism, people do not like those types of things, and atheism over here in America is very religious, so I get lots of hate from that. But by far, the most hate I get is from pro-choicers for being pro-life. And I know the reason why. So for one thing, pro-lifers, unfortunately, here are used to getting lots of like death threats and rape threats. People say, well, if you're anti-choice and against women's rights, I hope you get raped to death and crap like that. It gets really, really intense. But the reason why they're so charged up about it is because we have this abortion industrial complex that's super, super manipulative and paints this picture of pro-lifers as old white religious conservative men who hate women, want to control their bodies, want to wreak havoc and have world domination and bring forth like a Handmaid's Tale type of scenario. So in their minds, like, we're really genuinely trying to hurt women, even though that's not what we're doing at all. And we are women. The pro-life movement is led by women. Women are much more likely to do activism, to lead pro-life organizations, to do the mutual aid type of help for pregnant and parenting people, and so on and so forth. But in their minds, we hate women and want to destroy their bodies and choices and control them and yada, yada, yada. And so they see us as like a complete enemy that must be destroyed. And that's why they give us so much hostility. A lot of us have been assaulted during protests. We've dealt with, there's a lot of, like, there's a Jane's Revenge organization here that's very pro-abortion that has been bombing and burning down pregnancy resource centers, which give different supplies like diapers and toys and books and clothes and whatnot to people in need. There's just a lot of different types of hostility at the hands of pro-choicers to pro-lifers.
Now, you mentioned a moment ago that, you know, this idea of abortion, it can only be something that was created by men. Can you go into that and talk about, because I hear that now the very, very few leftists who I've heard who are pro-life, the common phrase amongst them I've heard is that abortion is a quote unquote tool of the patriarchy. Yeah. So tell us about that. Tell us why you believe that abortion is actually a male idea, and tell us what is meant by it's a tool of the patriarchy.
So if we're looking back in history, at least in America, and I think it kind of trickled outside of America after that, the abortion doctors were all men. Women weren't even really allowed to be doctors, so that makes sense. The leaders of abortion organizations were men. Abortion has strong ties to eugenics and Nazism, unfortunately. Those were led by men. It also has ties to, let me think, what was I going to say? And so the way that abortion started being associated with feminism, because back in like even the 1970s and before, all of the people who were pro-life were left-wing feminists. It actually was that the sides were switched. In the 70s, Democrats were more likely than Republicans to be against abortion. And there's a book called Defenders of the Unborn, the pro-life movement before Roe v. Wade, that helps explain the left-wing side of things and how people who were pro-life were the ones to be against war, for animal rights, for peace, for LGBT rights, and for women's liberation. And feminism started off pro-life in the first place back in the 1800s and all throughout. Even in the 70s, most feminists were pro-life still. But in the late 1960s, NARAL, which is still going strong today, but it was founded by a couple men, Larry Lader and Dr. Bernard Nathanson. Bernard was an abortion doctor who killed like tens of thousands of children, and he wanted to make sure that abortion became legalized. So he went to the feminist leaders with Larry Lader, and they knowingly lied. They made up lies about how many people were getting abortions, how many people were dying from abortions, how many people supported abortion, who pro-lifers were. This is where we got all of the stereotypes. They were the ones that created the stereotype that pro-lifers are just a bunch of Catholic hierarchy people who were conservative and, you know, didn't care about science and so on and so forth. And they made up the lie that if we legalize abortion, all these women are going to die because look at the huge amounts of women. There weren't even enough women dying to account for the huge numbers they claimed that were creating this huge wave of death of women from abortion. So they were just flat out lying, and they took those lies to Betty Friedan, who was the leader of National Organization of Women at the time. And they tried to convince her that she needed to support abortion and that feminists needed to support abortion in order to save women. And it worked. She wasn't pro-choice before that, but she became pro-choice after they lied to her. And that's how it started to happen, was these men lied to feminists and really tried to coerce people into supporting legalized abortion. So there's that aspect of it too. But the thing that really, when I was 14, made me think that was just like, we're the ones that are much more in tune with the life that's growing inside of us because it's happening inside of our body. And so it's that much harder to just be like, oh, well, I'll just go kill it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's so much easier for a man to support abortion because he's disconnected from feeling the movements of the child inside of you and feeling the kicks and, you know, watching the ultrasounds and watching them grow and looking up baby apps and seeing how they're growing inside of you all the time. Because we have the ability to create or grow that life, it's just a lot more close to home. And so it's harder for us to be pro-abortion without men trying to coerce us into it. And there are a ton of deadbeat dads who really want to not even have to pay child support. So they pressure us into abortions left, right, and center. They're just always being like, okay, if you don't abort my child, I will kick you out of my apartment. You will be homeless. You won't give any love for me, or you're out of my life. I hate you. You have to abort. I can't do this. I can't raise a child. So abort it, abort it, abort it. So there are a lot of people that have a lot of stories about being pressured, coerced, or forced by men too. So there's a lot of different aspects of how men push us into abortion, because there's that side of things. And there's also men who kill us because we don't abort. And then there's also, or slip us the abortion pills if we don't abort, so that we think we're having a miscarriage when really they just put abortion pills in our food. And then there's also male bosses who push their their employees to abort too. Hollywood is hugely bad at that. There are a lot of actresses who have gotten abortions because they're directly forced or coerced into them, because their male studio execs didn't want to have to deal with like a pregnant Hollywood actress. So they told them to abort and, held their jobs over their heads.
It's interesting because you've given such a detailed explanation there. And I'm wondering, by what you're describing here, you're almost describing it, or maybe you are exactly describing it, as if it's like this male patriarchal place psyop, essentially, that's essentially been put out there in order to brainwash women into believing that their own baby is like a parasite or something. Are you essentially saying that it was men who have basically originally, naturally women would have an affinity with their baby, but it's only because men have put this idea of pro-choice out there and ascribed it as this thing that's like a woman's rights issue? Are you saying that that's kind of what's happening here? It's almost like this very carefully placed kind of almost conspiracy theory, but maybe not conspiracy theory, from the patriarchy that's kind of put that out there?
I guess you could describe it like that. As somebody who doesn't want to be pregnant or parent myself, like, I can understand that if you have a child inside of you, like, maybe you wouldn't be super, super attached, but you would still understand to some extent that there's a human being inside of you that deserves respect and not to be killed. But then, like, the abortion industry that was kind of built up by men did try to brainwash us into believing that the human beings inside of us aren't human beings at all, but rather clumps of cells or parasites, and that having them killed isn't killing anyone. It's just having cells scraped out of our bodies. And so that gets inside of people's heads. And even when they're feeling kicks, that kind of changes the way they think about it, to where they're like, okay, they're basically being gaslit into believing that it must not be a human being kicking me. I'm just pregnant with a clump of cells that I can, scrape out of my body. No big deal.
So it was something kind of created to serve men in a way. So it's like, haha, get this, I can go around and just have unprotected sex with women. And then we're creating this thing called pro-choice, which is going to benevolently kind of like make it seem as if it's this thing where it's like, don't worry, it's just a parasite, or it's just a clump of cells kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And it goes in deeper than that too, because the abortion industry is a multi-billion-dollar a year industry. So money is a huge motivator for it today. It's really like you can make loads and loads of money off of doing abortions, because you can do so many in a day, and they each cost several hundred to several $1,000s per one. So the Planned Parenthood, they release their annual statements, and it's like up to $1.9 billion revenue per year. So it's not even
big pharma almost.
Yeah, I guess kind of. But yeah, the reason they do it, it's for the patriarchal aspect and is for the capitalist aspect. It's hugely capitalist too. And then there's also the history of how racist it was too, because the easiest way to kill off a group you hate is to just kill them in the womb, because they can't fight back. So there's a lot of like Richard Spencer, the neo-Nazi, he's pro-choice because he doesn't like certain groups, and you can just kill him in the womb. And that helps. Oh, and like in New York City, there's been different times where there have been more Black babies aborted than born. So their numbers are being lowered through abortion because it's eugenics. And then same goes for disability rights. Disabled kids get way more killed in the womb than non-disabled kids. And so that's an easy way for direct eugenics of like, let's just treat, disabled kids as lesser than us by killing them off in the womb. And even Down syndrome babies, they get killed at really high rates, despite the fact that, they're repeatedly saying that they love their lives. They have happier lives than the average person, but they're still getting slaughtered in the womb because of ableism saying that their lives must suck, let's kill them off, So there's a lot of different aspects, but patriarchy one is definitely one of them.
It's fascinating hearing all these points coming from you, because every time you ever hear a leftist talk about abortion, an intersectional vegan, for goodness sake, like yourself, every time you hear them talking about abortion, it's everything what you're saying about patriarchy, ableism, blah, 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 but it's the other way around. It's like, yes, pro-life is ableist, it's patriarchy, it's this and that. And then you come on the stream and you give all these counter opinions that most people just, dare I say, probably haven't actually heard in the vegan movement, actually. So it's all very interesting. I just want to say to everyone who's watching the stream now and is thinking, hostile things, whatever, about Kristin coming on here, we hope that everyone listening, whether you agree with Kristin or not, you cannot fail to say that these are actually interesting points, because you're stepping out of an echo chamber for once and you're hearing actually something from the other side of the coin within a leftist circle. But I just want to flash up a comment on the screen I just want you to respond to, Kristin. So this one here from Massilia says, better to be aborted than live in hell with parents who did not want you. So yeah, obviously a baby who is not wanted, the idea is that, well, what's the point in bringing them into existence if a parent doesn't want them anyway? So how do you respond to Massilia's comment here?
Yeah, usually when this comes up, there's like two different answers to this, because on the one hand, I grew up with very rageaholic parents that had their own issues of themselves, but took out all their frustrations on me and made me suicidal by the age of 11. I've dealt with loads of depression and trauma and, parental abuse and dealing with lots of issues like that. But should I have been aborted? Absolutely not. That's my body and my life and my choice. No one else's. No one should ever be able to force me to die just because they want to assume what my life will be like and how much hell I'll be living in. I did live in hell. Still not your right to choose to kill me. No matter if you're an abortion doctor, no matter if you're a pro-choicer, no matter if you're my parents, not okay, because it's my life and my body. Secondarily, I don't want kids. If I had a kid inside of me, I would not be any less likely to treat them right just because I don't want them. I'm still someone who has empathy and compassion for people and has the intelligence to understand how to treat a child right. If I had a child that I did not want, I would still show them love and compassion and support and empathy, teach them the right things, teach them how to be compassionate people to grow into compassionate adults. And I would still, raise them right. The fact that people are so keen on saying that not wanting a kid means you'll automatically abuse them and create like the situation where they're living in hell, all that really does is say that you don't trust people who don't want kids. You want to look down upon people who don't want kids, and you think that we're all automatically abusive. But in reality, abuse has absolutely nothing to do with whether or not you want a child. My parents planned and wanted me. They thought they were good parents by hurting me, because abuse isn't about wantedness or not wantedness. It's about how much you were taught as a kid that this is how you parent. My dad thought that screaming bloody murder at me and cussing me out all the time just because he was in a rage fit was good parenting, because he thought that that would like prepare me for the real world. There's a lot of people who have parents who are tough love parents or authoritarian or whatever, who think that they're doing right by their kids by being that way, because they have this skewed view of the world where if you don't toughen your kids up and scream at them and hit them and do all these things in order to prepare them for what they're going to be like and as adults, then you're failing your children, you suck as a parent. That's why abuse happens. For instance, 74% of millennials, this is from a 2014 study, but 74% of millennials believe in spanking, despite 50 years worth of research saying that it causes ill psychological health. Spanking is absolutely abuse, but I know so many people in these comments will say that it's not. It causes trauma. It causes you to live in hell. But parents do it because they think it's the loving thing to do. I could go on and on and on about this subject, but I think you get the hint.
Very, very comprehensively answered. Yeah, thank you. What do you make then of, because, you know, every time I've ever seen a man comment any kind of pro-life opinion on social media, or not even pro-life, just anything that even veers slightly towards pro-choice. They could even be towards pro-life. They could even be a pro-choice man who just thinks, but, you know, there is obviously a cutoff point, you know, late term or whatever. Like, you always hear this from leftist women, from feminists within the vegan movement. You hear, no uterus, no opinion. Now, how do you respond to no uterus, no opinion?
Well, first of all, they don't really believe that, because even if you have a uterus, they're not going to listen to you unless you have their exact same opinion. And even if you don't have a uterus, they will listen to you if you have their exact same opinion. So they're not even holding to that phrase at all. But secondarily, I've always thought that men have a duty to stand up against abortion, to fight for my right to not be told that because I don't want a kid, therefore someone should have to die on my behalf, and that therefore my body should be treated as a vessel of death for the vulnerable and defenseless, and to stand up for those vulnerable and defenseless who are being brutally slaughtered in the womb by the millions each year worldwide. I think men need to be speaking about abortion. And I know that, like, and even when it comes to pro-choice men, like, speak your voice so that we can help you understand how much abortion hurts us. Because if you never say anything, you probably won't hear our opinions and probably won't be able to actually see the other side of it, right? So yeah, I've never really believed in the whole, sometimes I, like, you know, sarcastically say that to pro-choice men, because, like, they're often misogynistic and try to speak over us and tell us what real feminism is. And it's like, okay, well, if you're a cis man, you kind of don't really understand feminism as much as me. So why should you get to say that? So no uterus, no opinion. But that's the most I'll ever use it.
So now, you used a very interesting phrase there a moment ago that I haven't heard before. And that was the idea that your body, by being convinced to abort your baby, your body becomes a vessel of death. Now, why that's interesting to hear is because the standard argument from leftist and intersectional vegans about abortion is that if you are pro-life, you are forcing women to become birthing vessels. So it's like you're this machine, almost this. The one they often compare it to is The Handmaid's Tale and stuff like that. So how do you respond to that about, you know, your body is this birthing vessel and women are forced to be these? It's some form of objectification in that way.
Yeah, to that I would just say most, you know, pro-life activists are women, and a lot of us don't want kids. A lot of us don't want to be pregnant. And it also kind of assumes that pregnancy itself is just you being an incubator. So that seems kind of weird to me. But pro-lifers aren't against people choosing not to have kids. A lot of us do choose not to have kids. All we're against is slaughtering children and exploiting women. And, you know, all the other, like, being ableist, being racist, so on and so forth. That's it. No one cares if you never have a child. I will probably never have a child. So the reason why I think the difference comes in when you admit science and understand that when you're pregnant, you already have a kid, versus thinking it's just a random clump of cells and therefore you must be trying to force a child on us. Because if I thought that pregnancy was nothing more than a random clump of cells in my body that would turn into a child at a later point, maybe I would agree that people saying, no, you can't, like, abort it, maybe I would agree that that was trying to force me to have a kid. But it really just comes back to the science.
We've got a comment here from Moesia, who says, if a tick or a leech attaches to a person, do you think they don't have the right to remove that? Could you answer that?
As a vegan, I do have empathy for ticks and leeches and kind of wish there was a way to not have to remove them. But I know that like ticks can cause Lyme disease, and leeches, I think they're both potentially dangerous. So that would be a moment where it would be like, well, we might have to remove them. But that would really only be comparable to like life of the mother situations. A baby in your womb is not gonna like do the same things as a tick or a leech. So I don't really think that they're comparable.
Well, here's the thing. Pro-choicers will often compare an unwanted baby to a parasite. And I guess there's a very strong argument from them that it technically is, because it's this unwanted being inside you who is leeching off your body, and it does have effects on the woman, right? They're going through all this horrible stuff during a pregnancy that they don't want. So how do you kind of deal with that as a pro-lifer with those kind of arguments?
Well, technically they aren't considered parasites because parasites are of a different species, not the same species' own child. And also it's technically a symbiotic relationship because the baby gives cells to the mother that helps heal her too. And then also each pregnancy is different. Some people love being pregnant because they didn't have any bad side effects, or maybe they only had good side effects like stronger nails and better hair and more energy. And then others do go through a lot harsher things. And so for those times where people go through harsh things, I would say it's not even fair to them to suggest that killing their child is the answer, because killing your child can be extremely traumatic. Like if I were pregnant and I had swollen feet and dealt with morning sickness and so on and so forth, and I got an abortion because of it, I would have PTSD and depression from the abortion and want to kill myself because that would be my child being slaughtered, So I don't think that killing someone's child is the answer to those things. Now, of course, if you get closer and closer to like life of the mother scenarios, that makes a little more difference. But like just general pregnancy symptoms, why should we have to have a dead child just because we have those pregnancy symptoms? That would then further create more symptoms like anxiety, depression, PTSD, so on and so forth.
So there's obviously a comment here who's from someone expressing distaste of what you said with regards to the slaughtering children phrase. So Leah Wilburn says, slaughtering children, wow, please don't compare abortion of cells to slaughtering a sentient being. How would you respond to Leah?
I would suggest that person read some embryology textbooks or take some biology classes, because we do indeed know from science that we are distinct living human beings at fertilization, and a lot of things happen in the first trimester. The brain is the first organ to appear at 2.5 weeks after fertilization. The heart beats by 3 weeks. The cerebral hemispheres and cerebellum form and begin rapid growth between 3 and 4 weeks. We start moving at 5.5 weeks. Brain waves are detectable to us by 6 weeks. The updated info on fetal pain is that it most likely happens between 6 and 8 weeks. And neuron synapse in the cerebral cortex by 8.5 weeks, meaning the cerebral cortex is there beforehand. And if we were to take all of these qualities and put them in another animal, like say we came across a new animal species and we found out all of these different qualities about them, we would say they are probably sentient. So also sentience can't really matter because it's speciesist and ableist, because not all animal species are sentient, such as sea sponges. And also, who cares if someone's sentient? They still have a right to life. But nonetheless, fetuses probably are a hell of a lot more sentient earlier than you think. So by and large, it's just a scientific fact that abortion kills children. No real way around that.
Now, you said something there that I feel some pro-choicers within the vegan movement might pick apart with regards to an inconsistency in that perhaps you've said something similar to what carnists might say. So what they would say is, are you not making a plants though argument there by saying, well, who cares if they're sentient, or it's speciesist to discriminate them? Like at a stage where, then again, I don't exactly know what your cutoff point is. We haven't discussed that bit yet. But just going off what you've just said there, have you not made kind of like a plants though argument, but with regards to a fetus?
No, because I'm making the point that we need to include more groups in our circle of compassion instead of less, which is the plants though. The reason plants though is used is to say they want to say plants are sentient or whatever, so therefore we shouldn't care about animals. I'm saying we should care about all animals, including preborn human beings, because sentience can't matter. So let's allow them to be into our circle of compassion, because they are still animals just like us. They are still human beings just like us. And what really matters is the things we share, not our differences. So a lot of this, I relate back to the documentary Speciesism, the movie, where the host is going through all these different things. Well, what about this? What about that? And the philosophers he's talking to are basically saying, well, this group doesn't have those qualities. This group doesn't have those qualities. We still allow them into our circles of compassion. So why not this group too? And likewise, like, there are a lot of disabled people who some people would say aren't sentient, but we still care about their rights because they're still human beings just like us, and they're still animal beings just like us. And so are fetuses, even embryos and zygotes. They're still human beings just like us. Why should we get to have a right to say, you're lesser than me because you don't have as many abilities than me, therefore I can kill you? Like, why not allow them to be in our circles of compassion? Because they are animals and humans just like us.
I guess this leads on to one of the most important questions there is of the abortion debate, because there's a bit of nuance in the pro-life side. I tend to find now you're an atheist yourself, but I tend to find it's the Christian pro-lifers who say life begins at conception, and therefore as soon as a baby is conceived, as soon as they're just this tiny, insignificant, like one cell, then it's too late to abort, right? But then there's also some pro-lifers who say, well, it's sentience that gives rise to individual rights. So it's once the being becomes sentience that there needs to be a cutoff point. When are you saying is the point where you're pro-life? Is there any stage before where you think abortion is okay?
I would say we just should give human beings and animal beings rights because they are human and animal just like us. And anytime you allow some human beings to be killed, that just kind of, would include some born humans too, because whatever quality you're using to justify killing those human beings also sometimes goes for born humans with disabilities or in different situations. So I think because the science says that we're distinct living human beings at fertilization, because that's when the sperm meets the egg and the chromosomes form and another human being is created, therefore that human being has just as much of a right to live as I do now. And so if the science were different, if the science said, no, it really is just a clump of cells until 5 months, then I would say, okay, 5 months is the limit. But I think it makes the most consistent sense to say human beings deserve rights, no matter, what age they are.
So are you, even though you're an atheist, are you similar to the predominantly Christian pro-lifers who say life begins at conception and therefore even like the morning after pill is wrong and stuff like that?
I would say they got that idea from science. I've been told a million times by pro-choice religious people that the Bible says life begins at first breath, and that, or they're Jewish and they'll say my religion supports abortion until the quickening or whatever. And so I would say it really depends on the science of how things like the morning after pill work, because there's a debate about whether or not it does things like stop an already fertilized egg from attaching. If it does happen to do that, then yes, I would be against it because that would be killing a child. If it doesn't happen to do that, then no, I wouldn't be against it because it wouldn't be killing a child. But I don't exactly know what the science has figured out yet because there's so much debate that it gets hard to really know.
I see. So at the moment, would you say, while you're sure on most of your pro-life position, there is a bit of like a gray area at some point, like at the super early stages, or?
I would say not really a gray area in terms of what should happen, but a gray area in terms of what certain things like the morning after pill can do. So I guess you can sort of call that a gray area. Like if we could definitively know that it does, stop an already fertilized egg from implanting, I would be against it. I wouldn't see it as a gray moral issue. I would be like, it's killing a human. It's wrong.
So one cell to you is moral value, and you just say, no, we just cannot kill that.
One cell that's a distinct living human being. Yeah. Regular random cells. Nah.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. I guess that's, now a lot of people would say that your position there would be absurd, right? But the one thing I would say in your defense is that at least it's a very clear, non-arbitrary cutoff point. Because what happens with abortion, it's such a complex issue that it's like, it needs to be, 2 weeks and 1 hour and 36 milliseconds and this, there, and it all gets very murky. Now, as much as many people might have just listened to what you've just said and thought, wait, what? 1 cell and it has moral value now. At least that is very, very non-arbitrary. It's very much saying, well, look, boom, this is when the conception was, and this is when we just have to assign this being moral value. Do you not believe, though, that sentience is what gives rise to rights? Like, we can't, if a being isn't sentient, this is going back to the plants, though, thing, right? So if a being has no sentience, like, what is its moral value, essentially?
So I would say sentience can't really be a reason to give moral value or rights because of the fact that it's entirely based off of different abilities. Depending on how you define sentience, some people define it as consciousness or the ability to feel or the ability of awareness or self-awareness, but these are all abilities. And to me, it's like, why would you require someone to be able to understand what's going on around them in order to be worthy of the right to life? That just doesn't make sense to me. So the reason veganism is drawing the line at the animal kingdom is because that's kind of how far we can go in one direction to allow more and more beings into our circle of compassion. But we have to kind of stop short because of the fact that we unfortunately do need to eat plants to survive. So we can't really say plants can have rights because then we'll die. And so I think it'd be cool if we didn't need to eat plants to live or kill them or anything. And I could see an argument for allowing plants to have rights in that case. But it's just so what is possible and practicable phrase. It's basically just animal rights is the line drawn. So we are all animals just the same. Let's we don't have to kill fetuses except for self-defense reasons, just like killing the born. So therefore, let's allow them to live. And unfortunately, we do have to kill plants.
Okay. I think I know how someone who was debating you would respond to this, though. They would just say, but Kristin, if you're going by the possible and practicable definition, why not just say that it's okay for a woman to terminate a single cell being that's inside her that has no more moral value at that stage than a plant, if that's practicable for her to do so? Because otherwise it's going to have extremely detrimental effects, potentially lifelong effects on her if she doesn't manage to give the baby up for adoption and blah, blah, blah. So how would you respond from that possible and practicable point from when that fetus just has no sentience whatsoever?
I would say that would cause a situation in which we're having to look at every born human being and saying, okay, are they sentient enough to be worthy of rights? Can we kill off the born? Can we do this, that, and the other? Because really, why should sentience matter? Like, they are human beings just like us. And so killing a human before they're sentient is really no different than killing a human being after. And we don't need to kill them. And especially because there are a lot of situations where pro-choicers will kind of amp up ideas of how terrible our lives will be if we have kids that you don't really know, because that's the future. They aren't future tellers. They can't assume that if I were pregnant, my life would be absolutely terrible and I'd have to deal with, all sorts of different things. You don't know. So it's just slaughtering someone on the potential future that both them and their child, or the mother and the child, might have, just for the sake of getting to assert dominance and control over this child based on their abilities.
Do you not believe in sentience hierarchies, though? Because even as a vegan and an anti-speciesist, I do. For example, I'm sure we could agree that, someone stamping on a puppy is obviously extremely different from someone pulling a sea sponge off the bottom of the ocean or something like that. Would you not agree with that?
No, I have watched animal rights activists go further and further into talking about sentience, but I don't think that's the right way to do things. And I know the reason why. It's because usually when we're coming up against non-vegans, their answer for why they think it's okay to kill cows and pigs and chickens and sheep and so on and so forth is, well, they're not sentient. And the answer to that is, but they are sentient. So it's like a carnist standard that whenever we're talking about sentience, we're basically giving credit to the carnist standard of I kill these animals because they're not sentient. But in reality, it's like, why should sentience be good enough? All that is really just kicking someone when they're down. Like, sure, they can feel it. That's wrong. But that's not why it's wrong to kill someone. Why it's wrong to kill someone is because it's their body and their life, and they're humans just like us, and they are animals just like us, and separating out different species and saying that we're above another species, such as sea sponges, or that dogs are above another species, such as sea sponges, is speciesism. And it's just another form of oppression, just like misogyny or racism or anything else.
Well, here's why I think it matters, because sentience is what gives us, let's be clear on what we mean by sentience, because you rightly said about 5 minutes ago, sentience can often mean different things. So I don't consider sentience just like fully being completely aware of everything around you and blah, blah, blah. I just mean having a subjective experience, just like a conscience. Now, that is obviously what matters. And you mentioned the word a moment ago, killing someone, blah, blah, blah. But I would say a being without sentience, like a plant, is just a something, or a sea sponge is very probably a something. Whereas animal, like, fish and cows and pigs and chickens and us and mice and chimps and so on are some ones, because we have that consciousness. And I can't see how something, I'm not even going to use the term something can matter morally unless they have consciousness and some kind of experience. Otherwise, it's just like, well, let's take the sea sponge analogy. Why is pulling a sea sponge off the bottom of the ocean, why is that any different to me like punching a punching bag, for example? Like, we obviously wouldn't give the punching bag rights. Why would like a plant, or why would it be speciesist to say that it's wrong to, like, say we had this hypothetical world where we didn't need to eat plants and we could all just take this magic pill one day? Why would it be like speciesist in your eye for someone to like cut the head of a plant?
Well, I would say, it really just comes back to, vegan ethics. We don't look down upon our fellow animals, no matter what species they are, because they're animals just like us. And that's kind of where the line has been drawn, is the animal kingdom. Sea sponges have some things in common with us. They have the ability to have immune systems. There's different aspects and there are different reasons as to why they're considered animals. They're actually sometimes considered the very first animals. They have common ancestors that only animals have in common. And so for me, it's like, if we go around saying some species are lesser than us, even though they're animals just like us, that's the definition of speciesism. That's treating this, different species as a hierarchy and looking down upon one animal species and saying that you're better than them because you have consciousness or whatever you want to say. But they're animals just like us. And what really matters is their similarities to us instead of their differences, because a lot of men have told me that I'm lesser than them because I'm female. So how can I, knowing that different forms of oppression happen and experiencing them myself, how can I look to a sea sponge and say, even though you're an animal just like me, I think it's okay to kill you because you have differences than me as well? So, and then plants, like, I could see a world with much more plant rights if we could get away with never having to eat or create shelter or anything like that. But that's just kind of where the line is drawn, is the animal kingdom, because of the fact that it's just so much easier to not kill any animals and value them for being just like us than it is to do that with plants.
But I think you do. I'm just going to press you a bit here before we continue with this discussion, Kristin. I think you do agree with sentience hierarchies deep down, because I know this is the insane burning building question that's never going to happen in our lives and that kind of say whatever. But obviously a burning building and you have to save either a puppy or an oyster. I would imagine you would save the puppy, right?
Oh, I thought you were going to go the abortion route, because we always get told, what if I had a petri dish full of 1,000 embryos versus
that's a good one. We could do that one after, actually. Okay, all right. We'll do that one after. Let's do puppy and oyster first.
I wouldn't really want to save either one in that case, or I'd want to try and save. I wouldn't be able to choose in that case because, yeah, I don't value a puppy any more than an oyster, especially because oysters are more oppressed because there's more people that are willing to kill and eat them. But like, yeah, I don't really understand why someone would just say, you have less abilities, screw you. I think in that case, learning about disability ethics would help a lot because, like, I don't think anyone should have to have the ability to have consciousness or whatever in order to just simply be worthy of the right to life. It's kind of just like, that comes way too into like ableism for me.
All right, and now the petri dish question. So I think it was a pro-choicer who put this philosophical thought experiment out maybe about 10 years ago or something like that, if I'm correct, maybe a bit earlier. And he said, I think it was a journalist, possibly, I could be wrong. And he said, yeah, burning building, there's a lab with a load of like fetal cell. There's like 1,000 fetal cells in one room. And then there's like a living there's a born child in the other room. Like, which one do you save?
Yeah, so in that scenario, I would save like if I had no other choice but to save them, I would save the 1,000 babies. There's a lot more to be saved there, right? And then if you're doing a one-on-one, if I had no other choice but to save one or the other and couldn't not choose, I would save the embryo because they're younger and have more life ahead of us, just like the average person would choose to save a 5-year-old over a 50-year-old.
Okay, cool. So I guess the next question I'd have for you is about, now you identify as an intersectional vegan.
Yeah.
Tell us about the kind of pushback you've had in the intersectional community within veganism specifically. I want to just say this is significant, this live stream, because you're the first ever intersectional I've actually had on a live stream with me. Because if you know anything about my content, it's very much not intersectional, right? But you've come on today because you've got such a unique view from the community that you're a part of within veganism. But then again, I say community you're a part of, I would imagine you've been shunned from that community for your views. I could be wrong, but tell us about like how intersectional vegans have treated you over having this view that doesn't tick this exact box.
Yeah, it's basically the same as the average pro-choice leftist non-vegan too. They essentially hate our guts and think we're, trying to destroy womanhood and like tear down the whole earth and, bring about world domination through the Handmaid's Tale and oppressing women into having babies and so on and so forth. But I view, so since intersectionality is the both looking at different forms of oppression and being against all of them and looking at the direct intersections between things, I would say you can't have intersectionality without both being vegan and being pro-life, because non-human animals and preborn humans are by far the most oppressed groups of all, because much more of them get slaughtered and oppressed than any other group combined. When it comes to abortion, there's like tens of millions of fetuses that are killed worldwide each year. And animals, I think it even reached like 74 billion land animals killed per year, or something like that. Somewhere between 50 something and 70 something land animals per year in the billions. And then trillions of sea animals. So each of these are like by far the most oppressed groups and the biggest power structures and forms of oppression. So I think they inherently need to be with any form of intersection, whether you're calling yourself intersectional feminist or you're calling yourself intersectional vegan, I would say must be pro-life, because there are lots of intersections too. And this is another group of oppressed beings. So some direct intersections between veganism and pro-lifism are that puppies and kittens often get slaughtered in the womb during spays, and that Beirut, or however you pronounce it, is chicken and duck fetus that people eat, and that calves and pigs get killed in the womb on slaughterhouse floors when their mothers are being killed, and that humanized mice trials happen during fetal tissue research, where babies are killed and then parts of their bodies are spliced onto mice to see what happens. And I think there was a fifth one too. Oh yeah, and they've started switching from killing baby male chicks after one day being hatched to doing sex selective chicken abortion, where they test to see if it's a male chick while they're still in the egg, and then if it is, they slaughter them that way. So there's loads of intersections, and especially arguments. Like veganism and pro-lifism have the exact same arguments, and non-veganism and pro-choicism have the exact same arguments. So in my opinion, even though intersectional vegans who are pro-choice do attack me a lot and are like, you just hate women and want to control our bodies, even though it's like, I have a uterus and I don't want to be pregnant. What are you talking about? But it's like, I think they're wrong just as much as they think I'm wrong.
Mm. And so I guess you've talked to us there about the compatibility of pro-life with intersectionalism and leftism in some ways. Can you tell us now about the compatibility of-pro-life specifically with veganism? Because most vegans, it would appear, are pro-choice, right? And they would say that, I guess their arguments would be stuff like, they might compare it to the dairy industry and, cows being raped to impregnate and then being forced to carry their calf to birth and stuff like that. And, the bodily autonomy of animals, and we shouldn't have control over their bodies and stuff like that. So how do you respond with like things about how actually pro-life is more compatible with veganism and actually pro-choice is the carnist thing?
Yeah, I actually use that same type of argument, because just like calves get killed and their calves get kidnapped first, therefore breaking up the mother and baby bond, the same thing happens in abortion. Like women, go through struggles because their children are killed and the mother baby bond is broken up there, and they're left to grieve just like mother cows. And there's a lot of different arguments as well beyond that too that are the same in both issues. For instance, meat eaters use my body, my choice too. They say, it's my body. I can eat whatever I want. I can choose to pay someone to kill someone because it's my body and I get to do that. Same goes for, of course, the typical my body, my choice pro-choicers. But it's like, why should someone have to die just because you want to do something with your own body? And then also choice. Meat eaters often say, but it's my choice. Same as pro-choicers. But it's like, as we say, if your choice has a victim, it's not a personal choice. You can't claim it's your choice when someone else is being forced to die when they didn't choose that and they can't consent. And then likewise, right to life is present in both. Both sides are just about saying, hey, let's not slaughter these other beings. Let's make sure that they have the ability to continue to live, because that's their right as living beings. But let's see what else. Oh, and then there's also different aspects that are the same too. Like both vegans and pro-lifers will use graphic imagery to say, here's what your choice looks like. And when we get pushback, the answer is, okay, well, how can you really support what you want to support if you can't even stand to look at it? Because here's the evidence. You shouldn't be like, I hate what this is wrong, whatever. Like, this is what you support. Maybe like admit that if you think this is gruesome, if you think this is wrong, you don't want to actually be supporting that in the first place.
Yeah, then, I just want to interject on that point and just say I have experienced this doing street outreach, and it's made me definitely see a parallel between how I think is a bad way for pro-choicers to react and how a bad way for non-vegans to react is you're in the street and you're showing them footage of something, and those non-vegans react with hostility, saying, how dare you, show me this, there's so-and-so walking around and you're out here in the middle of the city, showing this stuff on the screen. It's like, well, you're the person who's funding it. And if you're telling me that it's moral, then what's wrong with me just showing it? Now, we can all have the debate about abortion and whether it's right or wrong, but I have to say, you have to be consistent here. If you are a pro-choicer and you think that abortion is morally permissible, you can't then act like a carnist and get annoyed at pro-lifers just for showing you the thing it is that you're saying is morally acceptable, right? Where you can still, if you want to hold the opinion that abortion is the moral thing to do, go for that, but you've got to at least be consistent and being like, and therefore I respect pro-lifers' right to actually show me what it is that I am supporting, because, I support that. And that's how that's because that's how carnists should be responding when we're in the streets. If you are paying for what's happening to animals, you can't shout at the people just showing you what it is and talking to you about it. But I'll let you carry on. Sorry.
Yeah, it's like, be consistent, right?
Yeah.
And then let me see. I have a whole list that I wrote down on my website about the parallels of veganism and pro-lifism, because it's kind of extensive. So I'm just going to be looking at that to remind myself.
That's fine.
Oh yeah, right to not be harmed and bodily autonomy. We care about the bodily autonomy of fetuses because they sometimes get ripped apart limb from limb in dismemberment abortions. Their body parts are being ripped away from them. They're being dismembered, decapitated. There are, especially late-term abortion, they shoot them with digoxin to induce heart attack and then like kind of suck out the brain. And there's just all sorts of gruesome things that happen to the bodies of these children as they're being aborted. And the vacuum suction method, kind of like you put like a suction canister in there and then their bodies get ripped apart in the process as well. So likewise with animal rights, we talk about how dismemberment happens when animals are getting slaughtered. Either their throats are slit or they're being chopped up before being cooked, or they're being, their fur is being ripped off. And so both sides care about bodily autonomy of the victims. And so whenever I hear pro-choicers talk about bodily autonomy, I'm like, well, for one thing, as someone who doesn't want to be pregnant, I don't think it's my bodily autonomy to tell me that having a dead child is the answer to that. For another thing, what about the bodily autonomy of the child who's being ripped apart from limb and bleeding to death, essentially? And then both veganism and pro-lifism also talk about how this is like a literal genocide happening right before our eyes. And both of them also make comparisons to slavery and the Holocaust, which I know everyone has like difference of opinion on. But, both of these beings are essentially treated as property by the adults in their lives and being told that they're worth less and therefore can be killed based off of it. And and then both talk about, different aspects that there are different options there. As someone who doesn't want to be pregnant, I know that I have options if I didn't want to raise my child, and if I were pregnant, that there's Safe Haven where we're allowed to drop our kid off at any hospital or fire department or police station or whatever, no questions asked. There's also open adoption, closed adoption, semi-open adoption, kinship care and guardianship care, where you give your child to a friend or a family member to raise. And this could be temporary or it can be long-term. And then if I felt like I could raise a child with different help, there's WIC, which is a government program, which gives us food. Women and infant and children, they get food. There's food banks, different forms of mutual aid. There's pregnancy centers, which gives us free diapers and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of options there. And likewise, vegans talk about how there are a lot of options that you have. You don't have to have meat. You can have various types of vegan options, different recipes, different places you can go to eat, so on and so forth. Is really just not needed. So the ultimate goal with that is to say, it's not needed. Here are your other options. And then right to continue living so as to continue to use other rights and choices as they would have otherwise is present in both too. We talk about how it's wrong to slaughter animals, not just because of their presence, but also because they have rights to their own lives and to continue to do whatever they would normally do in the first place, whether that be, finding food for themselves or creating families or whatnot. We respect their right as living beings to have their own lives. And likewise, we respect the right of fetuses to be able to grow up and decide what they want to do with their own lives. And I would say both, back to the dairy thing, both exploit women and those who are pregnant in the female reproductive systems, because no one goes skipping down to an abortion clinic happy to do it. It's something that causes a lot of stress on people, and that they most often do because they're pushed into it by one person or another. And so likewise, it's like these dairy cows are going through their children being birthed and then killed, and their bodies being exploited in the same type of ways. There's really a lot more, but I feel like I'm rambling.
No, it's fine. And then I guess what are the compatibilities that you see of pro-life now with feminism? So we spoke a lot there about the veganism point. How does it correlate with feminism? Because feminists, so many feminists just say that abortion is this feminist right, and the pro-life is like an anti-feminist position. You can't be a feminist if you're pro-life. So like how is it compatible with feminism to be pro-life?
I would say that in that case, it's a matter of the abortion industry using our bodies and our lives and our rights as a way to try and turn a profit off the deaths of our children, which is horribly exploitative to us. And there are a lot of women who deal with a lot of trauma and grief from abortion. I've known dozens of post-abortive people, and they all have PTSD, depression, grief, and have dealt with suicidal tendencies because of it. A lot of people have killed themselves because of their abortions. And the reason why this happens is because they don't abort on the basis of just wanting to kill a child. But in reality, that would only be the way that you could abort of your own free will. They abort because they were either told your child isn't a child, it's just a clump of cells, it's just a parasite, so on and so forth. Or they're told you cannot be a mother if you're single, if you're poor, if you're a teenager, if you're going to school, going to college, want a career, have a career, or want a life worth living, or want to travel. You can only have a kid if your life is perfect. Therefore, you should abort. And if I were pregnant and I didn't know the science and I didn't know that I had other options and that people were lying to me when they said all these things, I would abort. And then I would have been exploited, right? I would have been used as a vessel of death for the vulnerable and innocent so that the abortion industrial complex can turn a profit off of the death of that child. And so we have like a patriarchal system set up where we're being used essentially to make money for the abortion industry, who's exploiting us and telling us you can't be a mom in this, that, the other situation. Therefore, you should abort. It's the only thing you really can do because you're irresponsible if you don't abort when you're in this situation. Like I live in a 370 square foot studio apartment right now. I don't have a ton of money. I'm single. I don't want kids. I have, so on and so forth. If I were to get pregnant right now, I would get so much pressure to abort from everyone around me who's telling me, look at all these things about your life. Do you really want to bring a kid into your life when these things are going on? I would get so many people trying to coerce me into an abortion. And if it had worked, then I would have gotten an abortion, even if I don't really want to, just because people are telling me over and over and over and over and over again, you can't be a mom if you live in that small of an apartment, if you're single, if you're poor, if you have this, that, and the other going on, you're irresponsible if you don't abort. And that's the kind of the reality of what abortion is really like for the average person. They're not doing it for funsies. They're doing it because they're told by everyone around them, you can't be a mom. Also, your child is a clump of cells.
So, you're extremely anti-abortion, as we can tell from this live stream so far. But if you were to accidentally get pregnant, like, what would you do? You're saying you wouldn't even abort, even at you wouldn't even take the morning after pill, or even if 1 week into the pregnancy you wouldn't abort? Is you would be fully not happy, but you would be willing to carry that baby to term?
Yeah, so there are options like adoption and so on and so forth. But personally, I kind of have trust issues from the way I grew up with my rageaholic parents. And I kind of don't trust anyone to take care of my child better than me. And I know that sounds conflicting, but that's the trauma I grew up with and the feelings it gave me. So I would raise my child because I would be worried that if I gave them up for adoption, someone else would treat them the way I was treated by my parents. And so I feel like I could be a good mom to that child. Even if I didn't want them, I don't lack the ability to treat them with love and compassion and give them, especially because I believe in gentle parenting. So I delve into that and how, different aspects of how to really treat kids and not hurt them. So yeah, I would have that child and raise them.
Now, one of the main points of contention we hear from pro-choicers is that pro-lifers are not pro-life, they're pro-forced birth. So how do you respond to being called forced birthers?
Well, there's a couple different answers for this. For one thing, abortion is forced birth. It's the forcing of birth of a dead child, because birth just means exiting the womb. So whether you're exiting after having been killed or whether you're exiting after being alive, it's still birth, or a certain type of birth at least. Secondarily, what people generally mean by that is that pro-lifers aren't, they don't really care about life. They just hate women and want to control their bodies and force them to have kids. That's the opposite of how I am. So I don't even think I qualify in their definition, because I strongly believe in choice. I strongly believe in bodily autonomy. I think everyone deserves the right to have sex however they want and use birth control. And I think everyone deserves the right to not have kids if they don't want to. And I care about all life. I care about 50 different forms of life and different oppressed groups and so on and so forth. So I don't really see them as talking to me specifically, because they're painting a straw man of what pro-lifers are like and trying to attack that. But I do think it's very ignorant as to who pro-lifers are and why we're pro-life, because it's just having this very narrow viewpoint of what they think pro-lifers are and what we believe.
Yeah, I just want to tell you why I don't believe in the term forced birthers either, except in one case, which I'll bring up in a moment, is that I don't think in any consensual sex case there is such thing as being forced to give birth, because that's just something a body naturally does. That's my analogy for this is it would be like someone drinking 8 pints of water and then saying, I was forced to urinate. Right. It's like, no, if you drink water, you've got the water in your bladder, and then your body naturally, you have to go to the toilet, right? Likewise, if you put sperm in your body, your uterus will, start carrying a baby, and eventually give birth. Now, I just don't. I'm going to bring up obviously the subject in a minute where I think there is a case for it being called forced birth, but generally I just can't see. It's just like, again, it's just like someone, drinking some water or eating some food or whatever, then going to the toilet. It's just something that the body naturally does. So,
yeah,
and it's like
biological,
right? And you can't blame what your body does, like on the government or on society or something like that. That's just naturally what will happen as a result of your choices, as a result of putting something in your body. So and I guess that comes with the whole, a lot of people on the right, I guess the reason they're pro-life is because they're pro sort of personal responsibility in that regard. Would you say that the left is also pro personal responsibility, or do you think that there is a huge issue there? And even you as a leftist could admit that actually a lot of leftists don't take personal responsibility for their choices, or what's your kind of view on that?
Maybe. I would say a lot of them would, if they really understood that there's a human being inside of them. Because really, the whole clumps of cells phrase, it kind of draws a parallel with wearing a condom. And if you're wearing a condom, do you have to take personal responsibility afterward? It's just a clump of cells, right? But I can see where you're getting that, because they do kind of act like, well, just because I had sex or did whatever, who cares? I can abort it if I want to. And that does kind of give off the impression that they don't care about personal responsibility and think it's fine to just do whatever, even if they create a human being. But I think the basis of why they say that is just because they really don't believe there's a human being there in the first place.
Okay, fair enough. Now, I guess what could any abortion topic discussion be without bringing up this extremely controversial issue? And this is the one case where I do believe there is such thing as forced birth or whatever. So I guess I'd love to hear your response to this, the extremely controversial issue of when the woman is actually, it's been non-consensual. So obviously rape conceptions, they do happen. Obviously they're much, much rarer, I believe, than consensual sex procreations, pregnancies. But how do you, and we've all seen these YouTube videos of pro-lifers standing in the street and they're doing their demonstrations and stuff. And, the main thing, the one thing the bystander always says to them is, what about in cases of rape? And it's obviously the most horrific thing that could happen. Imagine you don't want a child. this absolutely awful thing happens to you, and now boom, you're now being forced to carry this evil person's baby to term. How do you, as a pro-lifer, and I'm sure you're very used to dealing with it, so you will have an answer, because this is something you just have to be prepared for discussing. How do you deal with this extremely controversial and divisive topic of rape conceptions with pro-life?
Yeah, so in the beginning, I was always against it because I don't think it makes sense to say that whether or not our mothers consented to something is the line in the sand in terms of whether or not we get right to life. I think that does kind of make it seem as if you're just trying to punish the woman for sex or whatever. So I've always been against it, but then going through my own situation where I was raped through grooming and coercion, that helped me realize that it's the worst form of abortion in terms of like the mother, because when you've been raped, you're at your most vulnerable and most traumatized state. The last thing we need is to deal with a dead child on top of that. If I had gotten pregnant from my situation, for one thing, my rapist would have forced me to abort, because rapists often do. They don't want any evidence of the rape happening, and they're not there to be daddies. They're there to rape and then move on, right? So there is a lot of like sex trafficking rape that happens where people drive their vans to take their underage victims and drive them to Planned Parenthood and force them to abort. So abortion is really a rapist's best friend in that instance. But also, rape victims deserve so much more compassion than just being told, okay, now you're going to have a dead child because you already went through this extremely traumatizing thing. Like, it's just two traumatizing things packed on top of each other that could lead to suicide, even much more so than before. And I think when we're told, okay, well, you have like a rapist seed inside of you, like, that's not really fair to us. We didn't do anything, and also that child didn't do anything, and also that child isn't just going to automatically become a rapist just because their father is. Rape doesn't really happen based off of genetics. It happens because of rapists' trauma themselves and wanting to take it out on women, or they were taught the wrong things. A lot of rape happens through coercion, and people aren't taught that coercion is rape, because the movies only show direct random strangers forcing extreme violence on people, when in reality most rapists are raped from people they know, either through coercion or date rape. And so that's kind of why rape happens, not because you have genetical DNA inside of you that will cause you to be a rapist. So all of these different things that people say about it, I don't think are fair. And I think a lot of people need to have more compassion for us, instead of just say that because we're rape victims, therefore we should go to a clinic and have a child be dismembered inside of our body and ripped out, like as if our bodies are baby garbage disposals. And I've known a lot of people who have gotten pregnant from rape or gotten pregnancy scares from rape. And I have a friend who was raped by her teacher and had a pregnancy scare, and she was pro-choice and she was going to abort it, but then she started looking up abortion, and that's how she realized she didn't know what abortion was. So she became pro-life. She didn't end up being pregnant though, but she became pro-life through being raped. And I have another friend who also was pro-choice and was raped by her boyfriend. And she was gonna, contemplating abortion, and he threatened to kill him and herself if she didn't abort. And it was through that kind of made her realize, like, oh, if I abort this child, I'm doing the same thing to my child that my rapist did to me. I'm just passing off that violence onto them. And I've known a lot of people who were pregnant from rape and kept the child, and they said that the child was like the best thing out of that, because it gave them someone to love and someone to love them during the time that they needed it most. And I've known people who aborted after rape and said that the abortion was far more traumatic than the rape, because you're dealing with feelings of regret and loss on top of feelings of being raped. And if we can understand that miscarriage causes lots of trauma too, then we should be able to understand that abortion does as well, and that people who are already in an extremely vulnerable and traumatic situation deserve a lot better than just being told that their child can die because of it. And so I just really see it as another assault on women. I think it's very similar to rape. And especially because men use that as a way to continue to rape us and to continue to control and dominate us and, force what they want on us. I've met so many pro-choice men in my life that come off as misogynist, and I know that they either potentially have forced someone to abort, or would if I were raped by them, or what have you. So I think this issue deserves a lot more thinking and compassion toward the victims, so that we don't also have to become victims of abortion. Because I do see every post-abortive person as the secondary victim in an abortion, because we deserve better than our children being killed on our behalf, or people are saying it's on our behalf, when really no one wants to deal with grieving a dead child, and no one wants to deal with the trauma of abortion. And no one should be told that having an abortion will take away your trauma, because rape trauma happens because the rape happened, not because we're pregnant from it. No matter how, even if you aren't pregnant, you're still going to have trauma from the rape.
Now, obviously the answer you gave there, it was very thought out and detailed, but what about, I guess one angle you were approaching that from was very much the idea that, well, and then they go through this other traumatic experience of, having to kill their own child who's inside them. But what about the women who are just generally pro-choice and just simply don't see that as a moral issue? They're just they've had this horrible act of sexual violence happen to them, been forcibly impregnated by their rapist, and they don't, now all they want to do actually is just say, right, and now I just want to, this isn't an issue for me, as in to get rid of this baby that I didn't want. The issue was me being raped, but the issue is not me having this abortion. This isn't a moral issue for me. So what do you say in those cases where actually this is something the woman just does want to go, they do want to have this abortion?
I would say those people are victims of the abortion industrial complex, pushing their ideology of abortion isn't really killing anyone, because I don't think the average person would just be fine with it if they actually truly understood that it's slaughtering children no different than slaughtering the born. For instance, people who have given birth after rape, they don't say, okay, well, I think I should kill my born child now. I don't see any problem with that. And I don't think any pro-choicer would be okay with that either. I don't think any pro-choicer who makes the arguments that abortion after rape is okay would be okay with that same child being killed after birth, even though they're the same baby, the same child conceived in rape. And so I understand that there are some people that kind of go on with their lives thinking, okay, I had no problem getting an abortion. But I think that's because they've been exploited by the abortion industry and told so many times it's not really a child, that they, started to believe that and kind of pushed any thought of the opposite out of their mind so that they could just move on with their lives. So I see them as exploited by the abortion industry.
Yeah, look, it's obviously a very controversial opinion that you hold, so I'm glad that I'm props to you for coming on and actually discussing that and putting it out there, because many people, they wouldn't, especially in the vegan movement, it's brave to express such opinions, such as, the kind of cancellation and that kind of stuff that can go with it. But as I say, as a pro-lifer, it's just one of the most, this is one of the things you get bombarded with, and it is just one of those things you do have to have an answer for. Now, what about this whole issue of, and we briefly touched on this earlier, I think, with the connection to veganism and carnism stuff, this whole idea, my body, my choice. So how do you respond to that? Probably the most common sort of slogan that the two slogans that I always hear, predominantly leftist, feminist, intersectional, whatever pro-choices uses. Number one, no uterus, no opinion, which we discussed earlier. And number two, my body, my choice. So how do you respond to my body, my choice?
This is another thing where I give different types of answers depending on the day. But if it were really your body, you would be the one being aborted and you would be dead. There's another body there that deserves to be taken into account, and they're the ones that are being forced to die, and their bodies are being forced to be destroyed, even though they can't consent. Secondarily, why should our bodies be used and exploited by the abortion industry? And like I said earlier, being used as vessels of death for the vulnerable and defenseless, or being treated as baby garbage disposals. That harms our bodies, to say that our bodies can be taken into clinics and someone can just chop up the baby and kill them and rip them out like that. I think that would be harmful to my body too. We deserve better than being, just used as pawns so that the abortion industry can make billions of dollars. That hurts our bodies. And bodily autonomy also, no one really says in any other instance that I can do whatever I want with my body, including kill someone who is vulnerable and defenseless. So overall, I've just always seen that as a really bad argument.
Yeah, cool. I guess that's one of the ones that you have to probably answer the most. So I guess that's like to pro-lifers, almost kind of like how they how vegans see the whole it's my mouth, I put in it what I want, right? That's how pro-lifers would see that, for like with regards to veganism. Okay, and then I guess the last little counterpoint that I have for you here that I just want you to respond to is this one. The fetus can't survive independently outside the womb. I think the argument has a bit more detail than that, but the argument I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
It's not viable to survive. How can you just give me more detail on that common argument that you lot face and tell me what your response to that is?
Yeah, I've always thought this was one of the weirdest arguments, because they're basically saying if a child can't survive completely on their own, therefore let's kill them. There's no reason to think that. That just makes them more vulnerable and defenseless, and means that they deserve more support. And like, why should we slaughter someone simply for being dependent on someone else? We don't do that in any other case. We don't take people who need caretakers and say, you can't live on your own, therefore let's kill you. We don't take people on ventilators and say, you can't live on your own, therefore let's kill you. We see these beings who need help and say, okay, let's have empathy for them because they are more dependent, because they are more vulnerable. And it really just doesn't make sense to say, let's slaughter them because they can't live on their own, especially because, breastfeeding babies, they can't live on their own. They need to eat somehow. They need their mother's bodies either from their breast or from their arms getting food or what have you. We're always going to have to spend some time taking care of others. Everyone is dependent on someone else when you're living in a civilization. It's just never going to make sense to say, let's slaughter anyone who's dependent on someone else.
Yeah, for me, that's always, I agree that has always been I've never got that argument since I've heard it. It just makes no sense whatsoever. I've never heard any other being being described in that way. Oh, well, they can't take care of themselves. That means they get killed. I mean, yeah, it's just the opposite of how it's actually the exact opposite, really, of actually how we describe, if we see like a piglet there in a barn without their mother, we don't go, well, they can't look after themselves, so we would kill them. Like, if anything, it's the opposite.
It's like a very conservative, pull themselves up by their bootstraps or else screw them type of attitude too. So it doesn't make any sense for left-wingers or vegans to make an argument for it all.
Now, that is interesting. You mentioned the conservatives there. Now, because you think as a leftist that actually pro-life is more consistent with the leftist position, does that mean that you think pro-choice is more consistent with the right-wing position?
Absolutely. I think
go into that. I'm interested to hear that.
Likewise, I was surprised that like pro-choicers were apparently left-wing. I feel like it makes sense for Republicans to far right to support abortion, because it's like, why would you care about fetuses if you don't care about those dying from war, or kids dying in school shootings, or people dying on death row, or so on and so forth? It's very consistent to throw fetuses in there and say screw them too. So I've always found it surprising that like, I know some conservative pro-lifers and they're like not that into equal rights for everyone and make, different adjustments for what they believe, but somehow you care about fetuses a lot. Like, So pro-choice, hear pro-choicers say that about fetus, they're using the same arguments. They're basically like dehumanizing fetuses, doing all of the things that conservatives do, saying, well, if they don't have this, that, or the other quality, if they can't eat it on their own, if they can't do this, if they can't contribute to society, if they, they can't drive, screw them. That's a complete conservative argument to make.
Survival of the fittest kind of thing.
Yeah, it's like,
yeah, I get what you mean.
Are you not like, do you not care about community and taking care of each other? Because you're sounding like a right winger right now.
Interesting. All right, I guess I have two more little points I just thought of to kind of run past you, and then I'm happy to end the stream because I think we've discussed a lot of stuff and you've brought a lot of interesting points to the table. So one of the other common ones that I guess you'll hear, and this is a very important one right now, is the whole population thing. Now, if we didn't legalize abortion, would we not just be in an absolute crisis because you would have like an insane amount of humans just like, I'm talking about, well, you tell me actually, because you'll probably know the stats better than me. How many babies worldwide get aborted every year?
Every year it's in the tens of millions. I think it was like around like 56 million per year. And I think they've guessed that a little over 1 billion humans have been killed in legal abortion since 1973.
Okay. So let's say, for the sake of argument, there would potentially be an extra, I don't know, 100 million people on the planet, maybe, or would it even be more than that? I don't know. It could potentially be, yeah, basically, how many humans would exist right now if abortion wasn't done? Do you know the stat?
It would be hard to tell because you never know who would have died by this point. Like a percentage of them would die before the age of 5 or whatever, but it would probably be up there in the hundreds of millions.
So there would be a few more 100 million humans on this planet right now at the time when we've got obviously global, like a huge, I would say an overpopulated planet as it is. So how do you respond to that with the whole population crisis and climate crisis stuff? And like, how do you respond to the idea that, well, it would just be absolute chaos if we didn't allow women to legally abort their baby?
So first of all, it's the exact same argument carnists use. If we don't kill cows, they'll overpopulate the world. If we don't kill deer, they'll overpopulate the world. And generally what we say is, well, first of all, no, they don't, because cows get force bred into existence. But even deer, like, why would we kill someone off just because we're labeling them as overpopulated? We don't go around killing born humans for the same reasons. If people actually believe that human beings are overpopulated, yeah, I would say you should be consistent and believe in killing the born too, especially because like you can make a lot more easy judgment calls on who should be killed. People over the age of 100, they have less life to live. And so if you believe that slaughtering human beings is the answer to overpopulation, kind of makes more sense to go in that direction. But overall, we should not be killing anyone based off of any ideas of overpopulation, because who's to say that their life is worth less than yours? You would be also in the pool of people who could potentially be killed because of overpopulation in that sense. Also, overpopulation isn't really what it seems. We have a capitalism issue. We have an issue with the 1%ers taking and hoarding all of the supplies and resources and money, leaving a lot of people to be poor. But just because there are a lot of people that are poor doesn't mean that we don't have enough resources. It's just that rich people are stealing it all and hoarding it all. And, like countries are, hoarding their oil instead of like sharing the wealth. And rich people, we now have several 100 billionaires and are looking toward having trillionaires soon. It's absolutely ridiculous that we have these people who are allowed to have such decadent lives while people are dying on the streets and starving to death. And so we're not actually overpopulated. We just have a capitalism issue, and we have an animal agriculture issue. As you know, if we were to switch over to vegan plant sources for all humans, if we were to have a vegan world, that would allow so much more land and so much more plants to go to us instead of having the middleman of raising cattle or whatever, which, they eat lots of food and drink lots of water and use lots of space that we feel that we don't have for ourselves, but easily could if we just stop those types of systems. So overall, we're not really overpopulated. We have more than enough resources for like 10 or 11 billion people. Also, our species is declining, or it will soon. The stats I've heard are that by the year 2100, our species is going to start to decline. But I think that's really going to be a lot sooner than that, because a lot of people like millennials and Gen Zers, we're just not having kids. And I'm totally guilty of that. But there's a lot of different things that go into people not having kids anymore. Everything from things you wouldn't really think about, like the rise in acceptance of asexuality and aromanticism, allowing people like that to not have sex and not accidentally create babies. The rise in feminism, allowing people like me to not be forced to settle down with men and have kids. The rise in more different types of birth control and male birth control. The, you know, people who otherwise would choose to have kids not wanting to do so because of climate change and so on and so forth. So I think in like the next few decades, the idea of overpopulation is going to be completely gone, and we're going to start to think, okay, our species is declining. What do we do then? So yeah, and I think that's different. Yeah.
And then I guess the last question I have for you, this one might be particularly tough as a vegan to answer, and maybe you haven't heard it before, maybe you have, but I think this one gets tricky. Now, obviously, I know you're vehemently against, obviously, the killing of unborn children, but as a vegan, you're also vehemently against what these children go on to do when they grow up, which is to mass murder animals by the trillions every single year, collectively as a species. So do you see at least one point in the pro-choice vegan position there that you're just allowing more and more animal oppressors to populate the earth and therefore massacre and cause more suffering, way more suffering to animals than would exist if we just let people get abortions, especially, you know, when their sentience is so insignificant, when they're just like, you know, the first week or whatever. Is there any kind of thing that you can see here where it's like, well, actually, I guess the pro-life position comes a bit weaker as a vegan there? Or do you still, how do you respond to that, basically?
I would say in order to be consistent, those people need to be in support of killing the born, especially because you don't know how a child will turn out until they've reached that age. You don't know if they'll become vegan when they're 12 or what. So since I see abortion is literally no different than killing the born, I wouldn't make an exception for abortion because of what they might potentially do unless I was equally going to apply it to the born and say, hey, let's kill off all carnists. But the reason why vegans don't want to kill off carnists, even though they think that, you know, it's really terrible that these people are doing all these horrible things to animals, is because they value those people's right to life too. And likewise, they should value a fetus's right to life no matter what they're going to end up doing. I just don't see it as a consistent argument. But of course, they're saying that because they don't really see fetuses as just as human as us, but I do. So for me, that's where if I'm going to support one, I'm going to support killing the other too. But I don't want to do that. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, thank you so much, Kristin, for coming on. I think I've asked you everything that I've wanted to ask you. I don't know if I'm sure I'll think of some other stuff as well, and maybe I'll get you on for a future live stream with other people or something in the future. But yeah, thank you so much for being a really good guest and for giving all those very good comprehensive answers to such complex questions. And I just want to say, you know, thank you, even though you and my views differ in many ways, you know, politically and stuff. And obviously you're an intersectional vegan and I'm very much not. I very much appreciate that you are thinking uniquely about every single issue that there is, and you actually want to come onto a platform and actually speak about these things and put your neck above the parapet, so to speak. And I mean, you're the type of person who as I say, you're getting it from all directions, right? Because like carnists hate you, and then pro-choicers generally hate you, and then even within that subset of the vegan community, within your own intersectional community, you're disliked there because you're pro-life. So you definitely, you know, I definitely commend you for all the views you have, and for expressing all those views, should I say, and for thinking all those things through thoroughly, whether we agree or not on everything. But yeah, thank you so much, and thank you everything for joining. Everyone for joining, and yeah, Kristin, just stay in the chat for a while, and then we'll end the broadcast there. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you later.
Thanks for having me on.